What's going on, everybody? My name is Nil,
And I'm Greenie.
and you are listening to the Tough Mulligans podcast. It has been quite a while since we've been on the mic.
Yeah, sometimes we need to take a break. Sometimes life gets busy, and that's okay. But we're back now, and we are finally doing two things today, which are very special. The first one is Tough Mulligans is finally talking about Tough Mulligans. We're talking about Mulligans today. The second thing is, previously Nilstan has been the one planning the episodes, but today I'm taking the reins. So, there's a couple of things that we gotta talk about Mulligans. First thing is I would really love to discuss the history of Mulligans. Admittedly, I haven't been playing Magic as long. I've only been playing post-2020, so I've only ever played with the London Mulligan. However, Mulligans have a long history in Magic, and I would love to discuss them. The other thing that we really need to talk about is how do we mulligan? And of course, we can't talk about every single individual deck, how to mulligan against certain things. There's too many factors, right? But what we can do is we can give you good principles to mulligan more effectively. The first thing to note before we start is that cEDH mulligans are kind of like the quantum physics of trading card gaming and game theory. The topic is really complex. This took a lot of hours to research, write, rewrite. You'll probably disagree with a couple of things that we say, and that's totally fine. Everyone's a person, and we are allowed for our own opinions. Just know that mine is right, because I researched this. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and if you hate us forever, get in the comments.
Yeah. Tell us how much you hate us.
Make a channel.
Anyways, let's start talking about the history of mulligans. So in the very early history of the game, there actually weren't mulligans. However, in about Alpha, there weren't mulligans, but when people started actually playing the game a little bit more, Magic players used a mulligan that's sometimes called the no land, all land mulligan, and it kind of reminds me how Pokemon mulligans work now. In a best of 3 match, a player could, once per match, present an opening hand with either all or no lands, hence the name. The drawback of this is that each player could only do this once, and it leads to some really careful deck building. Some players, sometimes called Sly players, named after Paul Sly, who popularized the idea of the mana curve, actually, followed Jay Schneider's revolutionary idea of a mana curve. And they built their decks in a very specific way to really kind of cheese this mulligan.
Yeah, for those of you young fellas who are missing context, the slide deck was basically version 1 of Red Deck Wins.
Do you think that cEDH would change on a fundamental level if we had an all land, no land mulligan instead of what we have now, which is kind of like the best mulligan for cEDH, but do you think it would change if the mulligans changed that drastically? Because I think it would look a lot more like Pokemon decks, right?
Yeah, you simply wouldn't be able to build cEDH decks the same way if you had no mulligan like that. You just simply wouldn't. You wouldn't be able to build them the same way. They wouldn't function.
I know that if I built a deck knowing that I was doing all lands, no lands, my current Winota list, I believe, runs 28 lands, 29 with an MDFC. Oh my gosh, I would run so many more lands if I could not mulligan unless I had all lands, no lands. How about you?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Before we continue on, so this first mulligan was introduced really early in the game. The next mulligan was introduced in 1997, and this is also where multiplayer rules started to kind of like be discussed roughly and loosely, where it's kind of a general rule across every format that contains more than 2 players. Your first mulligan is free, and that's from 1997 basically on. So actually in 1997, a new mulligan was tested in standard play at Pro Tour Paris, which is why it's called the Paris Mulligan. Asterisk, if you are a newer Commander player and you think that the Paris Mulligan is the same thing as the Paris Partial is different. Paris Partial is when you take part of your 7 and you throw it back, and then you draw 1 less than how many cards you shuffled back in. But a full Paris Mulligan, as it is officially known, is basically like, don't like your hand, you can shuffle up and you can try again. You just draw 1 fewer for every mulligan you've taken. So you draw 7, then 6, then 5, until you are either satisfied with your hand, or until you have 0 cards, whichever comes first. It is important to note that this is the longest used mulligan in Magic's history, and it's led to a lot more risky deck building. White Weenies was run at the Pro Tour Paris Worlds in 1998 by Brian Hacker, and compared to Red Deck Wins, the original slide deck, which was on 21 lands, White Weenies in 1998 was on 17. And that's a lot of factors, right? That's your mana value, that's your mana curve. What do you know? Pulse line the mana curve. But it also has to do with the mulligans. It is with the introduction of the Paris that we really begin to see how shaping your opening hand at will, as opposed to just, do you have lands? It introduces a more aggressive style of building, and you're able to play a lot more. Paris really started to introduce the concept of the Johnny into Magic's wider ecosystem. The idea that you can really just kind of play around with your deck and do whatever you want, and you don't have to worry necessarily about your land count as much, though it is important. White Weenies is the example I've chosen, but virtually every deck from the 98 Worlds abuses the mulligan rule significantly. It's kind of really funny to watch. I can only imagine how cEDH and how Commander as a whole looked back when Paris was the mulligan. I mean, so the next mulligan changed in like 2015, so this was like 5 or 6 years before I even knew what Magic was. How do you think a Paris mulligan would impact your deck building? Because if I couldn't sculpt my hand as much, I feel like I would be a lot more conservative, but still more aggressive than an all land, no land mulligan.
Yeah, I think 100% land counts go up.
Mm-hmm.
With the inability to just always see a perfect 7, land counts definitely go up. Draw engines definitely gain more traction. You'd end up seeing decks designed to do anything as long as they could increase their consistency.
Consistency is always the name of the game.
I think Turbo and Stacks would take a massive hit under the Paris mulligan as it was.
It would be more of a blue farm hell than it is.
I think you would basically only be able to play mid-range in this in cEDH specifically. In 100 card singleton, I know it's not how it worked out in 60 card formats. Do get in the comments, but don't be mad at me in the comments.
Well, yeah, losing that extra card and being forced to not draw as many and see as much as your deck. I mean, card draw is king, right? And no one does card draw better in our meta than mid-range. Specifically blue farm, but TNK, basically Tymna Plus would just dominate everything. Ban Tymna as commander, 2025.
I know it's not how it worked out in 60 card formats, but in a 100 card singleton, I'm almost willing to bet that you would be able to play almost nothing but mid-range.
I'm about to talk about that. Oh my gosh. So Vancouver mulligan is so messy. Actually, September 2015 is when the Vancouver mulligan got introduced. Funny thing, it actually started at a pre-release event. Of all things, I think it was for like Zendikar Rising. It's kind of, not universally, but it's pretty highly regarded as the worst mulligan rule ever instated.
Yeah.
Vancouver mulligan is the exact same as the Paris mulligan, where you draw 1 less for every time you've mulled. But if you've mulliganed literally at all, so if you don't take your first 7, you can scry 1.
Yeah. I can firmly say that I have lived through the Vancouver mulligan, which is almost the same thing. I've been through it, but
Mull was a mess. The scrying factor was introduced as a way to kind of make the game more equitable between mulligans, but what it led to was a lot of cheating, a lot of confusion among pro and amateur players alike, and other than cheating, the mulligan also began to enable card draw focused decks more significantly, more impulse draws, decks that were lower to the ground, so again, more mid-range. Power creep did also become a factor in this era, and that is important to talk about before we hit London. More heavy-hitting sets were printed. This is when Magic kind of really started ramping up the process of embracing Commander. Process began in about 2011, but it didn't, hit full force until 2020. It makes sense that in the middle, 2015, of this era, that's when they really started experimenting with multiplayer as a whole. This is the era when they did Myriad, they did alternate commanders, and the entirety of Oath of the Gatewatch. If you've played Magic that long, you know why that's important. If you, however, are like me, and you haven't been playing super long, Oath was really a big turning point to what we now have within the game. This is what caused Eldrazi Winter and Modern. This changed basically every format, arguably for the worse. This was a genuinely terrible time to play Magic. Mulls didn't help. Keep in mind through all of this, the first mulligan of any Commander game is effectively free, again, leading to a little bit more confusion among Commander players about when do you scry. Vancouver was, by basically all accounts, overcomplicating a simple process on every level, and nobody really liked it, unless your name is Nilsdan, who apparently loved the Vancouver Mulligan and wishes we could go back. Because he loves...
Hey man, I grew up with it.
I mean, I know you grew up with it.
I grew up with it. I didn't hate it nearly as much as the masses seem to hate it. I think cEDH would be cool with the Vancouver Mulligan. I'm just saying. I think forcing the combo demons to not see 7 cards every time would be an interesting thing, but I can appreciate the fact that it would turn into Tymna the format.
I've talked to a couple of people. It would turn into Tymna the format, yeah.
I can appreciate that.
We could always run a couple of, like, testing games to see what happens if decks built for London Mulligan experience Vancouver Mulligan. We can always do that. We have a Discord server where we run games. We could always grab a couple of people and we could run a couple of practice games. I think you are right that I think Vancouver actually makes cEDH more viable than Paris, if not because you're seeing an extra card. But when the big 2020 hit and Magic really started to become, I wouldn't say mainstream, but a lot of players started playing around 2020, myself included. In the release of that year's core set, the Mulligan rules changed one last time to what we have now, which is officially called the London Mulligan. To take a London ball, you shuffle an unsatisfactory first 7 into your deck, you draw a fresh 7, and then put a number of cards equal to how many mulligans you've taken on the bottom of your library. It got rid of the scrying of Vancouver, and it did a few other things. 1, it simplified and streamlined a convoluted Vancouver into a really clean decision. But 2, it fundamentally altered the way every format thought about deck building, mulliganing, playing, how fast you're moving. But we're going to keep this mostly to Commander. Think about it. With that sweet, sweet multiplayer rule of your first mulligan is free, you can go to 5 cards in your hand and see 7, 14, 21, 28. You can see as much as 30% of your deck and select only the best cards to play with. You will sometimes hear people say that London is insane because it lets you kind of like sculpt your hand. And that's why. It's because you're seeing so many cards. You can see insane amounts of cards, select your best ones. It's the ability to see so many cards with so little downside that leads to decks now kind of in this era and currently being really combo heavy and running so much closer to the ground than they did previously. If an all lands, no lands mulligan is comparable to algebra, then the London Mulligan turns cEDH opening hands into like advanced physics. You can absolutely learn how to do it. It takes time to master, and many people never do. Some would argue you can't fully master it ever. So with that in mind, let's talk about how you can wield the power of the London Mulligan to your advantage. After all, as the title says, Mulligans Maketh Man. Asterisk, this podcast is focused primarily on like critical games, like prize games and tournament play, but when it comes to pickup games, always feel free to keep a hand in the name of experimentation. We've tried to name factors in this podcast that play into mulliganing, but there's just stuff we can't cover. Real factors within mulliganing, like the players you're against, how experienced they are, your own playstyle, experience, luck, mood, the phase of the moon, they can't be accounted for. This podcast is focused on theory and good principles, such as math, statistics, and knowing your matchups. Before we begin, there are a few principles you need to cover. Understand?
Yeah.
How do you feel about mulliganing?
It's freaking hard, dude. It is really hard to mulligan. It's a process that takes time, and for you to, the learning curve is very steep. It's one of those, as you grow more intimate with your favorite deck and you grow better at playing in it, you'll know what your deck needs and what it likes to see. And that all comes with time. It all comes with experience. Because you can theory craft any day of the week, but if your deck can't actually do it outside of the lab, then it can't do it at all.
It's kind of like the fruits and vegetables of cEDH in a way, where it's like, you just need to know how to do it. You just need to eat your fruits and vegetables. I know you don't like to do it, but if you want to feel your best and do your best in a game of competitive Commander, you need to know how to mulligan. I'm sorry, you just do. Luckily, these skills for mulliganing, because mulligans are same across all formats, with Commander being a little different because it's multiplayer, these skills can apply to more than just Commander. They can apply to more than just Magic, and more than just trading card games. Being able to say, is what I have currently better or worse than what I could potentially have, is a fantastic skill to have for life, really. So, I have this theory, actually. Regarding mulligans, people aren't afraid of mulliganing. People are afraid of losing to a bad hand. people will sometimes look at their first 7 and they'll go, oh, this is okay, but my second 7 might be worse. And like, it's only really remedied with building a good deck. And in cEDH, hopefully there's no bad cards in your deck, but if you have a bad hand that's made up of bad cards, one of the remedies for that is good deck building, and the other remedy is unfortunately good mulligan practice. You just have to keep pulling hands until you recognize good and bad hands. And you can't just pull them in a vacuum. You do have to pull them and then play them. I'm so sorry to say. The only way to get better at cEDH is by playing it. Who would have thought?
That's a really big thing that a lot of the newer players they really struggle with in this format. They'll rely like really heavily on the words on their cards and say, oh, well, this is pretty good, I can't live without this, or this is pretty good, but it doesn't do anything unless I draw this, that, the other, and the guy in between. And you gotta look further ahead than that. You have to, don't assess like the words on the card, assess how you can possibly use them to your advantage. Like a perfect example of this is a Surveil land. I remember back when Surveil lands, people said, oh, they were unplayable in cEDH. Now there's at least one in every deck, including Rogsai.
Tap land in Rogsai. Do you know how good a land has to be a tap land in Rogsai, one of the fastest decks in the format? So why do you think Surveils?
You see those cards in literally every single deck because, honest to God, the ability to, on an off turn, fetch land into a way to set up your next turn is fantastic. But if you just have it and you're reading it, oh, this card enters tapped. Oh, this card puts me a turn behind. Oh, this card is bad. But that's not the use case.
Surveils specifically are super weird because they surveil, right? A surveil is leave it on top of your library or put it in your graveyard. It's kind of like a scry. It's in cEDH, there's kinds of things that we describe as being similar to a draw, but not a draw. Drawing card is an obvious example of a draw. A scry is very similar to drawing a card, and things like Dragon's Rage Channeler, which also allow you to surveil, are sometimes called card draw engines, even though they are not drawing cards. It's because there are things in cEDH, because our format is so funky, that are effectively equivalent to drawing a card. Surveil is one of those things. Unless you are a very experienced player, or you're able to think about the game that way, which I know I personally am not, you're not going to realize these interesting and dynamic and kind of interactive use cases unless you actually play the game with the hand that you are keeping. Requires a lot of playtesting, requires a lot of gold fishing, but you want to be good at the game, right? That's why you're listening.
Indeed. Just you got to keep it in mind. The number one thing that you have to remember is that you're never going to perfectly master mulligans. There's always the chance that your next 7 is better than this 7, and there's always the chance that you don't quite see the way out, even though
absolutely
it's laid out there for you.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I struggle to accept it. I really like doing things perfectly as well as I can. It's always been kind of an internal turmoil with my playstyle specifically that I will never master mulligans. Mulligans are one of the reasons you don't see a lot of people talking about mulls is because they're so contextual. Again, we can provide principles, we can provide guidelines, we can say, oh, you should try this, this, and this, but there will never be an A plus B guide to mulliganing for the perfect hand for every scenario. There just can't be. There's too many factors at play. Good hygiene for hands and like making sure you're keeping the right hands at the appropriate times, that's going to be helpful. Experience is helpful, knowing your matchups is helpful, and we'll get into that later. But you need to accept right now that this is a fast and loose guide. This is not a breakdown on how to mulligan for your specific deck, because that's game theory stuff, and I did not go to college for that. With that being said, let's get down the principles. There's kind of like a thin but really clear line on what makes a good hand and a bad hand. Nilsan, you and I have talked occasionally about the concept of rationalization. The idea that, like, when you do an in-game action, literally ever, there's a reason why you do it, and you need to know that reason beyond I felt like it or I don't know. Do you think rationalization plays a role, big or small, into mulligans? And if so, what role do you think it plays?
Oh, it's massive. The mulligans are the most important most powerful thing you can do in the game of Magic, because that determines how you start off your game. And I would personally argue that your turn 1 and the hand that you kept is more important than anything else in the entire game. Rationalization is going to sit there and let you think about it and say, okay, I have this and this and this and this, and I need this one thing, and these things are bad in this matchup, but I believe that if I've built my deck a certain way, I can mold this away and consistently find the thing I need, but with more tools that I can possibly have. I'm gonna mulligan this because I have good odds to get something better. You have to have a reason behind the things that you're doing, because if you don't, you're gonna get screwed over consistently by yourself, and you're gonna sit there and wonder, oh, my deck is just bad. Oh, I didn't build my deck well. Or this is the deck's fault, or this is my opponent's fault. When in reality, you just kept a bad hand. It doesn't even have to look bad. If you don't have a reason, you shouldn't keep it. It's the same as putting cards in your deck. Yeah. If you can justify it with words, you're allowed to test it.
Even if it's not a good rationalization, if you can give a generally logical answer, 100% you can test basically anything. I mean, there have been decks that have been built that are not public for reasons because they're bad, but like, I've built Winota Breach Lines. It didn't work. It wasn't good, but I tested it because I had a reason for it. Yeah. Rationalization is an important part of every step of Magic, from building your deck to shuffling it up, mulliganing, which is what we're talking about now, to playing the game and choosing when to win. If you can master rationalization, especially in the mulligan stage, where I would argue it's the hardest, you can do anything. You can do anything in this game if you can rationalize a mulligan correctly. But that's enough about rationalization and kind of like getting into it. You guys are here for a reason. It's because you want to know how to mulligan and the principles for mulliganing properly. Let's discuss matchups. We've discussed in previous episodes, episode 4, I believe, there is something in cEDH, sometimes called matchup theory. Boils down to rock, paper, scissors style argument. Stacks locks down Turbo. Turbo outpaces mid-range. Mid-range outvalues Stacks. Matchup theory plays a really, really big role in mulliganing because, like, think about it. A Turbo player is going to worry more about speed in the face of a Stacks deck, while knowing your opponent's deck is a skill that traditionally is prescribed to, like, Stacks players like Milstan and myself. It's really a critical skill for every single cEDH player to have. You need to know what your opponents are playing, how they're playing it, why they're playing it, and how that stops or interacts with you. So, one of the things that we need to talk about with matchups, and Nilstan, you are much more experienced on this with me, is anchors. How do you feel about anchors in cEDH? Do you want to kind of explain anchors in a mulligan? I don't know. You like to pop off about this. Pop off.
The concept of anchors is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's just, I play a very proactive Stacks adjacent deck in very, very bad colors that has to make reads and know what you're doing in order to succeed. The concept of anchors is how I've gotten to the point where I am. What an anchor is looking at your matchups and seeing what specific cards are going to lock you in place against those matchups. That's all it is. Your anchors change in every pod. Your anchors change against every pod. They change in every deck. And knowing the general rules and what you're looking for is going to get you way farther than, like, saying, okay, here's every specific deck. I'm going to know exactly how to fight every specific deck. And I'm only going to accept exact correct things against them.
That's how you get bad mulligans. That's a bad mulligan practice. Is to say, for example, against the Winota. I've played against a lot of beginner players who, for some reason, I don't know why they're playing Grafdigger's Cage in 2025, but they are. I know why, it's canon. But they'll play Grafdigger's Cage in their deck, and they'll see my Winota when we sit down, and they will mulligan for Grafdigger's Cage. They'll go down to like 4-3-2 cards just looking for a land and a cage, not realizing that there are more parts of their deck that they can use. They can use Drannith Magistrate, they can use things that stop me from playing Winota, they can use things that tap down my creatures. There's tools in their toolbox, but because they are so focused on specific cards instead of, like Nilstan is saying, general anchors, they completely waste the best opportunity they have in the game to get ahead. That opportunity being your 7.
You're not looking for specific cards, you're looking for card classes.
Mm-hmm. And, like, speaking of card classes, I have a bone to pick with the Magic community. I can't tell you how many times where I've almost jumped across the table and, like, punched my opponent. Not really. Because they say, this is a good hand. I have lands and spells.
Oh my god.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I hate it so much. I'm sorry. I know casual players. I love you guys so much. Stop saying lands and spells. It's not a good way to address a hand. There's better ways.
The phrase "I have lands and spells" has caused irreparable damage to the Magic the Gathering community.
Like, I feel like I age every single time somebody says it. There are better ways to look at your hand.
You are operating under a mulligan system that allows you to get away with murder. Lands and spells is not good enough.
Lands and spells is out. Proactive, reactive is in, along with setup and follow through in offense and defense. Proactive versus reactive, that can be stuff like for, what's a proactive reactive deck? Blue Farm, where you can set up your proactive deck, your proactive pieces to begin throttling you towards a win, but you can still have your reactive pieces to protect your win. A setup and follow through could be a Rogside deck, picking up the pieces to set up, and they don't need as much follow through because the setup is ad nauseam, but they have things to help themselves get there, right? And then with, again, Winota, I'm sorry, I have a personality trait and it's playing that stupid Boros deck. Offense and defense. Offense being laying down my little weenies so I can swing and get big triggers. And then the defense being things that protect Winota, whether that's a Pyroblast or whatever, right? So, anchors are good. Lands and spells are bad. Please talk about your opening hands differently. I swear. Like, I'm not trying to be mean, but, like, it's more important to know that the individual decks that trump yours, as opposed to just kind of how to mulligan for every deck. Anchors are important, but matchups are also really important. You need to know how to play around the decks that trump yours, and how to maneuver pods with such decks kind of as a whole. This maneuvering does begin with mulligans. For example, if I have a Rogside player against me, and I'm playing blue for some reason, and I have a Mental Misstep in hand, I'm going to hold on to that because I know that they are going to cast either a Dark Rit or a Tutor for that sweet, sweet payoff, right? So you can mulligan a little bit to stop certain decks, just don't make it your primary focus. And keep in mind, again, going over how to mulligan against every single deck in the format, depending on your list, is not something we can realistically do. It would take the rest of the year, every single day, 24 hours a day, to discuss each meta deck, each off-meta deck, what decks beat each what, and everything like that. If you are interested in learning about your individual deck on a deeper level, chances are your commander or color combination has a dedicated Discord server. If you can't find it, comment below. We will link it to you. And if your deck doesn't have a dedicated Discord server, you can hop in the link in our bio for access to our Discord server, where we can, and our community can, help you figure out your mulligans and your matchups a little better. So, matchups. That's all done. But, okay, great. I'm a Winota deck against a Rogside deck, a Blue Farm list, and a Sisay list. What does that mean in the greater scheme of things? You have to know your role within the pod. Based on what your opponents are playing, you do need to kind of analyze where you're sitting relative to everyone else. You need to know how your opponents are going to mull, roughly. You don't need to know their exact cards, of course. And what strategy they're probably going to go for. You need to know when to rely on your opponents to stop each other. That is so critical. It's so weird. You have to, if you're playing blue, for example, Blue Farm, you have to mulligan simultaneously as though your opponents have every single counterspell in their deck in their hand and the mana to cast them, but at the same time, act like they are never going to use them on your opponents. The best way, this is a phrase that I use all the time. I don't know about the larger community. I'm sure Nilstan is sick of me saying it. You always have 2 allies and 3 enemies at any point in a game of cEDH, unless I kill one of them. So, Nilstan, you play a weird deck. You play Safi. When is it important for you to be aggressive with your mulligans? What decks would you sit down at a table with that would cause you to mulligan more aggressively, maybe go to lower counts than you might otherwise? What decks would you see at a table that would make you go lower? Is it Blue Farm? Is it Rogsai? Is it Sisay? Is it Winota? What is it? Is it other stacks decks? What makes you be more aggressive?
It's a bit of a tough question because of all the factors. Like you said, it depends on where I'm sitting. If I'm sitting in first seat, and I'll be more likely to see a more proactive hand as playable. But if I'm in third or fourth, then I'm looking for, okay, where is the Rog side player sitting? Where is the, what are the other bad matchups that spring to mind? Rog side's definitely a bad matchup.
Kirik isn't awesome for you.
Kirik's not awesome. It's really hard to interact with Kirik. Inala's a nightmare for Safi to deal with. Safi actually matches up better into mid-range than most stacks adjacent decks, but that's just because I'm not stupid and I actually put removal in my deck.
Oh, thank heavens. Somebody needs to do it. cEDH players, actually scratch that. EDH players play removal in your deck, I swear.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're losing to mid-range in a mid-range format, but you don't want to change your deck to fight a mid-range format? Crazy. Crazy how that happens. That when the best thing is everywhere, you should do something about it. That's crazy. Yeah, that's basically steals the first turn back. Kind of. They're still first to act, but you have the advantage on resource.
Mm-hmm. So, seat order is kind of complicated to talk about, especially on the fly. Basically, if you're going first, you are going to be able to be much more aggressive in your early plays because your opponents just physically have access to fewer resources than you. Asterisk, your mileage may vary. Gemstone Caverns need not apply. Mulligans do change on seat order. If you're going last, you kind of have to run faster to catch up with first seat, and that might cause you to mulligan more aggressively. Alternatively, depending on your deck composition, it could cause you to mulligan less aggressively because you can't afford to go lower than a certain number of cards. So that does play a factor, and we'll go more into that kind of in the future with potentially future episodes specifically diving onto stacks, midrange, and turbo on how to mulligan. So I do feel really bad for not including seed order. That's fine though. So having played a lot of casual and competitive Commander, something I've noticed is that when casual players jump to cEDH, or when players who haven't played casual but are playing cEDH for some reason, they tend to mulligan less aggressively. And I've talked to people, I've done research, I've read, and I've analyzed. It boils down to keeping worse hands because they don't want to take more time mulliganing, they don't know what to look for, and their deck is just not able to make up the lost card advantage by going to anything lower than really 6 cards. A good cEDH pilot is able to mulligan aggressively, partially because of the social acceptability to do so in a cEDH game. And I do want to say, guys, if you are new to cEDH, it's acceptable to mulligan. You are okay to mulligan. I promise nobody's going to get mad at you. And if they get mad at you, they're not going to yell at you. They're going to call a judge over and have the judge say, "Hey man, you got to pick your hand." Like it's so much of a non-issue. Please mulligan. It's okay, I promise. But also partially because their deck is just fundamentally designed to keep up with faster games. They make up card advantage. Their cards are more impactful. But more than any of that, more than the deck building, more than the social acceptability, the thing that separates a good cEDH mulliganer from a bad cEDH mulliganer is a good cEDH player knows how to win, how to get there, and how to stop their opponents from also getting there. This is why matchup knowledge is so critical, I swear. Please learn your matchups. I have lands and spells is a bad idea when you're learning cEDH because it's not a good enough excuse to keep a hand in a format as dynamic and complex as this. Like Nilstan said, anchors is such a good way to think about your hands. What is going to keep you in the game? You throw that anchor down as fast as you can, and that'll keep you there for now, and you can dig later. It's really the concept of anchors. People, when I talk about it, people just like their eyes kind of glaze over, but it's really not that complex. You're looking at the pod that you're in, seeing, okay, there's Rogside, there's Blue Farm, there's Rogthras. Okay, there's 3 turbo decks. Yeah, buddy, I'm gonna throw down a Thorn of Amethyst as soon as humanly possible. So, sometimes people will look at a hand and they'll go, this feels bad, but I don't know why. And so I'm gonna give you some reasons as to why you might be feeling in your soul that a hand is bad. If you are relying on top decks, your hand is probably bad. If your mix of effects, specifically for stacks, but kind of generally speaking, if your mix of effects and interaction isn't diverse and impactful, or if your hand just kind of doesn't work, it's too slow, it's too fragile, you don't have enough pieces that you need, or you have too many pieces not where you need them, toss it back. Toss it back, it's fine. There is no shame in mulliganing until you have a hand you're happy with. Again, I don't know why Magic players are so afraid of breaking the social contract over this when there isn't one. Just mulligan. Please. It makes your games better, it makes you play better. Your game experience will be better, casually or competitively, if you learn to mulligan properly. But that doesn't mean that you can just kind of throw every single hand back if it's not perfect. That's not how the game works, right? You do need to learn when to cut your losses. So, when do you cut your losses? That's a hard question to answer. Again, it's very dependent. But generally speaking, a balancing act, right? You don't want to lose your whole hand to gambling, but you also can't always keep a bad hand just because the next one might be worse. What are some things that you look for when you're deciding to kind of cut your losses on a mulligan, where it's like, I really can't throw it back. I really just kind of have to keep this, even though it's not necessarily what I like. What are some things? Is it hand count? Is it cards in hand? Is it like the cards that you actually have in your hand? Is it how big your hand is? Is it timing? Because are you running out the clock by going to 2 cards in your hand? What are some factors that you experience or that you take into account when you're deciding, you know what, I just kind of have to be satisfied with where I'm at, even if it's not where I want to be?
Yeah, depends on your deck, depends on your play style, depends on the situation at hand. I mean, for me, it's kind of a combination of all of them, because the deck that I play specifically is more of a... It's kind of a mulligan simulator type deck, where if you can't mulligan, you're not going to succeed. It just doesn't work. So you end up taking into account all of these factors, like, okay, I'm missing a sack outlet, but through some combination of nonsense, I can find one eventually. But I'm going down to 5, so I'd have to lose this and this, but I still want to get to 3 mana. So I can trim the combo creature, and I can trim the second land or the third land. So then I keep 2 lands, 1 ramp spell, 1 plan, and then 1 interaction, and there you go. When you're looking down the barrel of other players who want to kill you just as bad as you need to kill them, you got to take into account their options versus yours and know what is acceptable. A big part of mulliganing for me is looking for your perfect hand. You find your deck's perfect hand, the best it can statistically do. Then you're going to take a step down. Say, is this acceptable? Is it yes? Okay. Go down again. Is it acceptable? Yeah. Go down again. And by doing so, you're going to reach a point in your mulligan process where you're finding the not specific spells, but the classes of cards that you find acceptable in your opening hand. Like I know I keep bringing up Safi, but it's the deck I'm most versed in, and it's actually really relevant as far as the mulligan conversation goes. The ideal hand for that looks like a sack outlet, 3 mana, and a combo creature. And then everything else is gravy. Okay? That's 3 cards out of 7 right there. Or that's 3 classes out of 7 cards. That's fine.
Mulliganing is simultaneously really simple and also really complicated. A common turn of phrase when you are learning to mulligan is a good hand of blank better than a bad hand of blank? So, is a good hand of 6 better than a bad hand of your second 7? Well, the current hand I have, I could grab a mediocre hand of 6, but it's not better than what I have currently in my 7, so I'm going to keep my 7. It's a great way to rationalize the cards you have in your hand, and like you said, class them. Is this good enough? Is this acceptable? Cutting losses with mulligans is a skill that takes time to learn, and it varies with each deck. If you play 60 card, this is kind of like learning how to sideboard. Some people are really good at it naturally, some people are really bad at it, some people have to learn, some people never learn. But it is a part of the game, and you do have to do it, and you do have to learn how to do at least the basics if you want to be functional within this meta. So, like, I know we keep talking about we can't do every single individual deck. There are some general guidelines for cEDH specifically because the format is so similar. cEDH specifically, and kind of generally the decks, they'll stick to around 5 cards in their hand to be functional. Your deck can differ. Roxai is a manual storm deck that I have seen go down to 3 cards and still function perfectly. Those 3 cards were, it was a land, it was ritual, and then they drew their Admons and they won on the spot. It was terrible. But just because we say 5 is the general guideline, your deck can be as low or as high as need be. It depends.
5 seems to be the general consensus of where people are comfortable going to before they take a mediocre hand.
You won't ever hear, like, for example, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're going to 5. But you might hear, holy crap, this guy's going to 4. Like, it's just, I don't know why, it's just the limit. There are scenarios for some decks where it makes the most sense to mulligan until you hit a land, even if that means having 2 cards in your opening hand. Asterisk, these situations are rare. It does play into this general rule of cEDH that you'll find, which is you need to do something impactful by turn 3. Even if that means just laying down a land and passing. And we will reference the impactful by turn 3 rule a couple of more times throughout kind of this mini-series. But with all of that said, the line of thinking that X is the moment you should stop mulliganing follows the exact same principles of X is when you should start mulliganing. Is my hand going to get better if I draw a tutor? How many tutors am I running? How many cards are in my hand? These scenarios are where the scary world of statistics comes in. There are people, most of them play poker, that can do these super complicated math equations off the top of their head. For us mathematical plebeians, it's totally fine to use general fractions. You don't have to say, I have a 29 in 99 probability to draw my first land. You can say, I got a 1 in 3 shot, right? It's not super deep. There are points in the game where it's not always a 1 in 100 chance, typically when you've dumped half your hand and half your library onto your board, or when your graveyard is full. But, I mean, you guys are smart. You know that 99 cards is different than 50 cards, and the statistics are going to be different. But, again, we're focusing on mulliganing. We're focusing on the beginning of the game. No matter what deck you're playing, the one thing that you absolutely must do, like Nilsan said, is figure out what an acceptable mulligan is and accept nothing less. What is an acceptable mulligan might be different than what an ideal mulligan is. But it's kind of like dating. Sometimes you don't get your ideal, but you do need to have your basic standards, and you can't go lower than those. Otherwise, it gets dangerous, and it gets not fun. Never look at the top card of your mulligan when you throw it back. This is another thing I see in cEDH a lot. It drives me insane. I don't know why people do it. It's bad luck.
Nah, man, I'm telling you, bro. I have been caught dead saying it so many times. There is nothing but hurt feelings on top of your deck. You never look at the top of your deck when you're mulliganing.
Because it's always, well, what would happen if I kept this hand? Well, you didn't keep the hand. When you win a game of cEDH, every decision that you made in that game is the correct one. Not really. Please don't blame your blunders on me. You don't need to say, well, if I win this game, I would have won faster if I kept the other hand. Who cares? Who cares? You are practicing mulligans. You need to practice mulligans properly. Also, it has happened before at my local game shop where somebody has looked at the top card of their library, put it back, went and like bought a pack or a drink or something, came back, forgot that they were supposed to mulligan, and had that free information. I don't think it's intentional, but it can cause cheating, so don't do it, if for no other reason than that. Overall, mulligans are complicated, right? We can talk about anchors for various decks until we're blue in the face. We can talk about the different archetypes and the matchups until we are insane. But at the end of the day, there are some key principles that you need to take away. Listen, what is your one key principle that you would give to somebody who has never touched cEDH, but has, I don't know, a pretty easy deck, Winota, Kinnan, whatever? What is the one thing that you would say to them before their first mulligan? What is the big principle that you need to give them?
You have to be stern but fair. Know what you're looking for and accept nothing less.
Be stern but fair. I like it. I would say don't be afraid to try again. I can count on one hand the number of times I've kept my first 7. Unless your first 7 is a god hand, don't keep it. Your second 7 is the same number of cards and you gotta look at more cardboard. I love looking at cardboard. It's my favorite part of the game. So, yeah.
For what it's worth, you gotta keep in mind, you know, we are tough mulligans, and Our catchphrase is, it's always okay to try again for a better 6. Be stern but fair.
Sometimes a better 6 is better than a bad 7. And that's a principle you should take to heart, and I think that's a principle that will genuinely carry you throughout life a lot further than I think you realize. Just pick a direction and start walking, and if it's not the direction you want, try again. Pick a new direction, start walking. So, but you do need a direction. Your hand needs a direction. It doesn't need lands and spells. It doesn't need your big silly win con in your hand in the first 7. It doesn't need that. What it needs is direction. You need a direction. Pick it and go with it. And if you can't find one, try again. Just keep trying until you get there. Is there anything else you would like to say to the people?
Yeah, it's great to see you guys join the server. We run free-to-play tournaments, hopefully every month. If you want to show us some support or help pay for the tournaments at all, we do have a Patreon. We'll link that below.
With all of that in mind, I would like to thank you all for listening to us yap about mulligans for the past, I don't know how long this video will probably be. Maybe an hour, half an hour, something like that. I highly recommend that if you want to practice tournaments, tournament games, cEDH, if you're learning cEDH, you hit that link in our bio and you join our Tough Mulligans Discord. We run tournaments. We have a lot of very, very good people within our community that are able to help you with a lot more deck building and Magic the Gathering than you might think. It's a community of beginners, but we've got a lot of legends in there. So, highly recommend you join. I'm Girl with the Green Suit. I run content on short form media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all that good stuff. And Nilstan is a fantastic person to learn cEDH from, specifically if you are interested in learning about stacks. So, with all of that in mind, any sign-offs, any last words, Mr. Nilstan?
No, I mean, that sounds about right to me.
Oh, meet us in Atlanta. Meet us in Atlanta. So Nilstan and I are going to MagicCon Atlanta this year, September. If you see us, come say hi. Like, we'd love to see you. We'd love to say hi. Like, honestly, genuinely, come to Atlanta and say hi. I think tickets are mostly sold out, but if you are going to Atlanta, please say hi to us. Please. We're lonely people. But with all of that being said, I don't think there's anything left on the table in terms of the basics of mulligans, unless you have something you would like to add at the very end. Maybe I've missed something. So with that, I'm going to sign off. God bless you all, and good night.